So it's a way of thinking about this process that is analogous to chemistry, basically. And so in this understanding of things, the alchemical understanding, as I was saying, there's a number of chemical reactions that have to take place that ultimately lead to our personal, quote, personal enlightenment, a discovery, a concrete discovery and experience of who we really are, what we really are. And as in modern chemistry, an essential component of what drives that series of reactions that leads to the end product is heat.
Mm-hmm.
And the experience of heat is called suffering. So, but again, it's perspective dependent.
Mm-hmm.
It's consistent with what we've already said. But in the alchemy analogy, as we undergo these series of reactions, if we have lost perspective and don't remember that we are actually the alchemist performing the experiment, and that it's a specific experiment designed to achieve a specific end result, if we forget all of that and our perspective shrinks into the equivalent of the ego perspective, then what we're left with is this experience of holy shit, why am I on fire all the time? And then there's a brief reprieve, and then suddenly there's more fire.
Mm-hmm.
What is God doing to me? Why is God punishing me?
Mm-hmm.
This isn't how it should be. Again, all of the stories that are created about that, the abdication of personal power then projected onto other people or a distant male omnipotent punitive God figure. The experience is one of suffering because of the loss of perspective. And when we remember the truth, oh, this is the nature of alchemy, that I have actually prayed for an experience of knowing who I am.
Mm-hmm.
I've prayed for an end to suffering.
Mm-hmm.
I've prayed to experience the third noble truth, life beyond suffering. And then I didn't know that to get to 3, I have to go through 2, which is, well, I have to go through 1 and 2, which is the experience of life as suffering. So in alchemy, it's, yes, you can have the gold. Here's the specific chemical reactions that need to take place. And the experience of that will seem like suffering, the exposure to that heat. But it's what drives the alchemical process, in the same way that you don't take a bunch of raw ingredients and then throw them into a cold pan and mix it around and then serve it for dinner. At least not if you expect people to eat it or to congratulate you on your skill as a chef, or to enjoy it, right? That what creates the gourmet meal is the exposure to heat and the actual chemical reactions that take place, the the denaturing of the proteins and all those chemical reactions that cook the food and blend the flavors and create all of that change. And it's an analogy, but it's also quite literal. I mean, that really is what's happening in the human experience. There are actual physical changes that take place in our body, in our blood chemistry, etc., that will feel uncomfortable. And you and I have had plenty of these physical experiences. And there's nothing to do about that other than to remember the context and get on board. So since I've been doing this recently, I'll also at this point I'll put up the Temperance card from the Major Arcana of Tarot, because that's the universal symbolism from that tradition that depicts the nature of suffering. And it's all about, it's a quote, tempering process, which means exposure to the tension of opposites.
Mm.
And in the card, it's depicted as hot and cold. And if we just go by that word temperance and use a convenient version of where you see that word used, which is in the tempering of steel, that also is a chemical or alchemical reaction.
Mm-hmm.
And so in order to make a really sharp and finely tuned instrument, it involves exposing metal to extreme heat and then pounding on it and then plunging it into cold, and then exposing it to extreme heat again and pounding on it and then plunging it into cold. And if we have forgotten who and what we are, which is all of us until we remember, if we're still in the experience of ignorance, of forgetting, then our perspective on that is the perspective of the sword, which feels like being heated up and being pounded on and being plunged into cold. I mean, it feels like agony. It's suffering. That experience changes when we recognize, oh, I'm not just some hunk of metal randomly being abused by forces of nature outside of my control, that I am in fact an active participant in a process designed to create a very sharp and useful tool, and that this is in fact what I asked for, and that I am not just the metal, but I'm also the blacksmith. And the blacksmith would be the perspective of self, and the sword would be perspective of ego. So maybe that's helpful to people to have, a less sort of spiritual or religious or non-dual. This is a more kind of colorful metaphor, this example of alchemy. But again, it points to the same truth, which is that all suffering originates in a loss of perspective of truth. All suffering originates in ignorance and the perspective of the ego. And so ultimately, that third noble truth, suffering can be overcome, or we can move beyond suffering, is synonymous with saying we can move beyond ego. It's the same thing. The end of suffering comes with the revelation of self.